Hey folks, once again, it's John. Once again, it's A is for Alcoholic podcast. Today's conversation is with Peter Murphy. He is a sober writer, and we talked about his story through waking up in a gutter in Wales to running workshops on writing in Atlantic City. What a great conversation. He helped me get over my judgment of using the word transformative when I talk about sobriety and writing. We talked a lot about faith and about prayer and about putting it down on the page and how that can actually change your life. And I couldn't agree more with that statement and with many of the other ones that he made. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Peter Murphy. Peter, thank you for doing this. I appreciate your time, your honesty, all of the things that come along with sharing this kind of stuff. I was going through your website, and there's lots of great stuff on there, by the way. As somebody who writes, who spends their time pretending to be a writer sometimes, you know how it is. There was lots. I really enjoyed the proofreading part, the roof reading.
Yeah.
Yes.
Roof reading. Yeah.
That was great. Yeah. And I want to talk to you more about the importance of writing in sobriety, because I know it's something that's really important to me. But I'd like to trace back a little bit and ask you where things began with you and alcohol.
Yeah. In the beginning. Yeah.
In the beginning, yes.
In the beginning. My father was a GI right before D-Day. He was stationed in a small city in Wales called Newport. And my father had a hankering for classical music. I don't know how he got that. He was a longshoreman, but he loved classical music and heard that there was a pub in Newport that played classical music. So he went there, and there was no classical music, but he fell in love with the barmaid. And so the pub was called the Windsor Castle Hotel. And so I guess my relationship with alcohol began there, because they met at a bar. After the war, he went back and married Thelma Elias Samuel, my mother's name. And they moved to America, where to New York City on the west side of Manhattan, where my father continued to be a longshoreman. But my mother wasn't happy, so they moved back to Wales, and that's where I was born, in the Windsor Castle Hotel, where I lived the first few years of my life in a pub. And then back to New York. My mother wasn't happy. Back to Wales. She wasn't happy. Back to New York. And when I was 7 years old, she committed suicide. Thus my troubles began. So we were moved around from place to place, a boarding school, which was miserable, other families, et cetera. And then I was in a situation where I was abused by a priest for about a year. Didn't understand. I was 10 or 11 years old. I didn't understand what was happening, but I just felt I was going to go to hell because it felt dirty. And when I was about 15, I'd been drinking socially before then, from about 12 years old. You go to a party and there was something, so you drank it. But at 15, it became a love affair. I fell in love with two things at that time. One was basketball, three things: basketball, the other was poetry, which was very strange, and the third was alcohol. And I thought I always wanted to have poetry and alcohol in my life. I thought they would be a big part of it. And that's when I began. So I was in high school at the time. And by the time, that was a sophomore, by the time I was a senior in high school, I was pretty much drunk most of the time. I somehow became editor of the yearbook, which was a big mistake, whoever did that. And there was a refrigerator in the dark room that I kept stocked with beer. It was supposed to be used for film,
right?
But I didn't have any money, so this was really awful. I sold yearbook subscriptions for people to buy the yearbooks and used that money to buy the beer, always meaning to pay it back. And so it became, I just had no hope. I just figured this is how it's going to be, and I just was a miracle I wasn't arrested and gone to jail. But that may have been a good thing. Had it been, it may have stopped at that point.
Right. I think, and it's amazing how quickly the behavior turns when we start drinking alcoholically. Like, you're saying 18 and we're supposed to be stocking the fridge with film, and already we are pulling out of the kitty to feed our habit so quickly. It's the cunning, baffling, and powerful thing that gets that's talked about with alcohol. So at this point, you graduate high school, you were in love with poetry. What's your favorite basketball team at this point?
Well, at that point, I had a tragedy. This was part of the thing is I had an accident playing basketball. I broke a collarbone and 6 ribs. So that was the end of my basketball career when I was 16. That didn't last long. But the first college I went to was St. Bonaventure University. And the big star then was Bob Lanier. I don't know if you heard of Bob Lanier, but he became an All-American in the NBA, played for the Detroit Pistons. So he was a junior when I got there. And so I became a St. Bonaventure fan for that year. But I was drinking. I flunked out after a semester. Then went to another college and flunked out. And then a third one and flunked out. So at that point, I decided, let me be near what I love. So I went to work at a bar, which made sense.
Right. I was a bartender for many years. It was great. All access, No, you don't have to get up early in the morning. It seems like the dream, right?
That's right. Yep.
And how long did you work in the bar? Exactly. Right.
About 2.5 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what was this bar? What kind of bar was it?
I described it was actually a nightclub in Queens, New York. It was a very posh place. I don't want to mention it because people are still around that were part of it, even though it was a long time ago. But I started off as a busboy, basically hauling ice back and forth, and then became the daytime manager because the other daytime manager got drafted, which was what's happening back then. That was 1969. So I got that job, and then I was bartending at night, and it was a great way to to meet girls, which was also important in my life. I wasn't very good at it, but it was like I got to practice. And I described my early life while I was in high school as early derelict period, and this period here after high school is mid derelict period before going into late derelict period, which happened later. So that was about 2.5 years, and I got in a lot of trouble. I wound up getting involved with a young woman who had been a heroin addict, and she had just gotten clean when I met her, and we learned to drink together. And it was a destructive relationship for both of us. And I always thought that she was the bad one in this relationship, but I realized no, I was as bad for her as she was for me, and I wish I could apologize to her for that.
Yeah.
But it got to the point where I had to do something. She got me $1,000 in debt to, this is going to sound ridiculous, a mafia connected dentist. And I kept getting these threatening phone calls. So I did what a brave person does. I ran away. And what I did was I ran back to Wales. I hadn't been to Wales since I was 3 years old. I didn't know if it was even a country. I wasn't quite sure because my father never talked about it. And I figured I'd go for a couple of weeks, 2 or 3 weeks, and let things calm down and figure out what to do, and then return to New York and deal with the problems. But once I got to Britain, I realized nobody in the entire continent knows what a screw up I am, and I decided maybe I can change my life. And this began late derelict period. I was there for almost a year. The 3 months turned into a year. And it changed my life. I mean, eventually I did get sober. I hit the proverbial rock bottom. I woke up in a gutter in Cardiff, Wales, 9 months later. And I was 21 years old and decided I had to change my life.
So you hit that rock bottom very early.
It was early in my life, but it was 5 years into it, 5 or 6 years into it. So,
right.
I didn't think I was going to live much longer than that at that point.
Yeah.
I had, at that point, I was living in a commune. It was 1971, that's what you did, or 72. And I decided I was so unhappy, I should either kill myself, get my ear pierced, or join this new religion that I had discovered, that I heard of, that seemed to have a kind of promise. And all of those things seemed about equal. I'll become part of the religion. No, I'll get my ear pierced. So it.
I love that the ear piercing, the cult, and suicide were all on equal footing at that point, right?
They were all possibilities.
Sense.
And so I tried the suicide part. That didn't work. And that's why I woke up that morning. Wasn't planning to wake up that morning in the gutter, but I did. And so I figured, all right, let me try, let me try the next option. So I never got my ear pierced.
Huh. So you join this new religion. What is
I
this
joined
new
it.
religion?
It's called the Bahai Faith. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. Baha apostrophe I.
It rings a bell. Yeah.
And what attracted me to it, I'll tell you what didn't attract me. What attracted me to it is I've been raised as a Catholic and went to pretty much Catholic schools, was I mentioned earlier, abused by the
Mhm.
police. And I had decided I was an atheist. But when I came across these Baha'is, which occurred in Ireland, I was teaching around the British Isles, they said that, first of all, they didn't have a clergy. They don't have a clergy, and that, okay, that's good. But they also said that the earth is one country and mankind is citizens, and that they believe that the purpose for today is to have unity, world unity, and to eliminate
Mhm.
prejudices. What had happened just before I met them, I was in Northern Ireland, in Londonderry, and this is during the Troubles in Northern Ireland. And I got
Okay.
involved in a shooting incident between Catholics, these Catholic drivers in a car I was in, and the soldiers. They were shooting at us, and I realized when I survived that, why are we killing ourselves over religion? Why can't we see we're all human beings? And I thought that was my idea. You know, I was my first original idea as an adult. I was felt smart. And then a week later, when I met these Baha'is, they said the earth is one country and mankind is citizens. And I was pissed. Wait a minute, that's my idea. But they had been believing this for over 100 years. So they were kind, and they didn't have any of the baggage, seemed to have any of the baggage that I had had in my religious life. The trouble is they believed in God and they didn't drink.
Mm.
And I would have probably joined them right away if they believed in alcohol and not God, but that didn't happen. But months later, when I was in Wales, I decided maybe I should look into that again because despite what I believe isn't working.
Right. Right.
And so eventually I became a Baha'i, and it wasn't what my plan was, but I didn't know how to do that. I didn't know how I was not going to drink, but I decided, let me try. I never heard of Alcoholics Anonymous. I didn't know what a 12-step program was, but I
Right.
decided I wasn't going to drink that day. And then I didn't know what I was going to do the next day. I said, I'll worry about not drinking tomorrow. And I sort of on my own came across this one day at a time thing.
Mhm.
Stupidly, I just figured I didn't know what else to do. And I haven't had a drink in since.
Wow. So in what was different, or maybe describe a little bit of the night you said you didn't plan on waking up
Yeah.
and hitting that rock bottom. What was different about that night that made you decide you were done? And then what was it about the next day that made you, after waking up when you didn't want to, make you decide
Yeah.
that you were done drinking?
Nobody's ever asked that before. That's a good question. The night, the commune I had gotten into when I discovered it, when I moved in there in January of 1972, it had been sort of an uplifting experience. There were maybe a dozen people living in this row house in the middle of Cardiff, and it was fun. I got a job working at a construction site, which wasn't fun, but I was holding my own. But everybody was doing serious drugs. And in my own relationship, I did drugs seriously for about 6 months and decided no more drugs. That was too
Mhm.
bad. And 3 or 4 months later, there were over 20 people living there, sleeping in shifts, sleeping on the floor, and nobody was paying rent except for me and a couple of others. Nobody was cleaning the place. It became worse and worse.
Yeah.
And the job I was working on became worse and worse, more and more depressing. The miners were not on strike. The coal miners were not on strike in Wales. And there were blackouts throughout the for 7 or 8 hours a day. There was no heat, no light, and it was cold. And I was physically uncomfortable. There was very little food. I became just more and more depressed, and I didn't see any way out of this. I had very little money.
Right.
I didn't know what else to do. I didn't know where to go if I left there. And then the police came, and they were getting ready to bust the place. In fact, they parked the car outside the house for 2 or 3 weeks, and kept saying, "We're going to get you soon. Make sure you're ready. We're coming in and arresting everybody." And by this point, I was also there illegally. My visa had expired, and I just got so depressed I didn't know what to do. So one night, it was March 25th, 1972, I decided that's it. And I did drugs that night for the first time in maybe 3 or 4 years. And I went down to a pub and drank whiskey, which I tried not to do because it was expensive and it wasn't working enough. I drank more,
Mm-hmm.
and that was the thing, it's just this damn this weak whiskey. And the next thing I know, it's the next morning, and it was raining, and I had peed myself in the gutter. I was just lying there, not far from the door. So that's what happened, and I was surprised that I was alive, surprised I was awake.
Right.
I didn't make it to the building and the construction site. I was planning on jumping off, but I didn't make it that far. That was an extra 2 blocks. And I was also afraid that, gee, it may not be high enough, and may not do the job. And I can't even kill myself right. So I was afraid of that. And I had gotten in touch with the Baha'is in Newport, the city I had been born in, a few weeks before, and went to a couple of their, this couple invited me to the home for dinner. I mean, it was just very kind people. And they told me about this meeting they were having with a special guest coming from London who was going to give a talk also in Newport. And that was that day. And when I woke up out of that gutter and I was soaking wet and I went into the house and tried to get dry and warm, I didn't want to go out again. There was no way in the world, but I had promised these kind people I was going to go to their stupid meeting. And at that point, I felt the only thing I had was my word. And, I figured, okay, the pub's open at 11. I could leave, get to the meeting by around 10, stay for a little bit, show my face, and go to a pub. And I actually planned to go to the Windsor Castle Hotel, which is right down the block from where this meeting was, that place where I started out. So I made it to the meeting. I was soaking wet by the time I got there because of the rain, and just staring at the clock, waiting for the time to happen. And afterwards, somebody offered me a cup of tea. So I had a cup of tea and I was getting ready to leave. And I started talking with the guy who was giving this talk. And he said, well, what do you think about this? So I said, well, it makes sense. And, this religion. And, I believe what you're talking about, getting rid of prejudices and uniting the world. I said, he said, why don't you join us? And I said, well, I can't do that. I can't live that kind of a life. I didn't want to say I drank. I was too embarrassed. But I said, I don't want to be a hypocrite. I don't want to join and not be able to live up to it. And then he said something that shocked me. He said, if you believe this and don't join, you're more of a hypocrite than if you did join and try, but can't live up to it. And he just called me a hypocrite. But I realized he was right.
Yeah.
And so that's what I did. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I decided, okay, I'm going to just trust this.
Right.
I still had trouble believing in God at that point. And I figured, all right, these people believe in it. They're kind people. They're smart. They have a lot more going on than I do.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's that realization of like, oh, these it appears that somebody else has figured this out. Perhaps anything could work for me, because
that was it was the anything part. Anything.
Yeah.
I didn't know how I was not going to drink, but as I said earlier, I figured, all right, I'm not going to drink the rest of this day.
Right.
And I didn't go down to the Windsor Castle Hotel. Instead, I hung around. And when the meeting ended, there were some young people from a city in Western Wales called Llanelli. Try to pronounce that 3 times fast. And they were good. They were hanging around. So I hung around with them. We went to dinner, and the pub, it was a Sunday. The pubs closed early on a Sunday. And, I stayed with them till the pubs closed. I go, okay, I didn't drink today. And I went back to Cardiff. And the next day, I figured, all right, I'm not going to drink today. And as I said, I made it.
Yeah. I a similar thing where I didn't find any sort of, I knew people that had done 12-step, and they had told me that it was available, but nobody had ever really like pressed me about it. And so my first several months, it was like, okay, just this one day, and then I will get through this day, and I'll figure this one out. And okay, I made it. Now I've made it 4 days. Now I've made it 5 days. So you are at this point, you're starting to focus on the 1 day at a time thing without having any sort of connection to a 12-step program, but you're also invested somewhat in this Baha'i, right? In
Right.
in that faith. Although God is still elusive at this point.
There was one of the things that the Baha'i said about God is that it's an unknowable essence. That's the definition. So
Mhm.
whatever we say to try to describe it, her, him, it's wrong, and that appealed to me because I couldn't figure it out.
Yeah.
And I began trusting now. I began trying to read the Baha'i writings. I got some books. I tried saying prayers. I didn't realize I was going to have to say prayers. I didn't like that part because I'd given up on prayer because prayer had given up on me a long time earlier.
Mhm.
But some of the prayers were beautiful. And that, from a poetic point of view, and I considered myself a poet at the time, and that attracted me, the language. So I said, I tried and I tried, and gradually they became friendly, the prayers.
Mm.
Uh, they weren't sending me to hell. They weren't, condemning me. They were uplifting me. There were prayers about aspiration, prayers about overcoming tests and difficulties, over prayers about becoming a better person. And they appealed.
Yeah. Did you find, I mean, or I should say, when did you find AA, or when did 12 step, that sort of that transition
Yeah.
into that?
I didn't know anything about AA. I didn't know anything about alcoholism. I knew I was a drunk, but
Right.
most of the people in my family were drunks. I didn't, that was normal. I didn't see myself as being any different from anybody else until I left New York City. I came back to New York, left, grew up a bit, and started, being in the world and realized, okay, not everybody had the same experiences I did. Maybe that was a little bit odd. And 12 years later, I met a woman who asked me if I was a friend of Bill. And I coincidentally, this was at a Shakespeare conference.
Mm-hmm.
I said,
Ah.
sure. Why else would I be here? And she said, no, that's not what I meant. I said, what did you mean? She said, AA. And I thought she meant the auto club. I mean, it was so stupid about this.
Right.
And then when she said Alcoholics Anonymous, why would you think that? And she started talking, and all of a sudden I was like hit with a hammer. There's a word for it. I didn't know there was a word for it. I was an alcoholic. I didn't
Wow.
know. And so she said she was going to meetings and she talked about the meetings. And I kept that filed in my head. And 3 years later, by this point, I was sober for 15 years
Yeah, I was gonna say, you were doing this on your own,
on my own.
ostensibly for 15 years.
And then I got in trouble. I was at an artist colony in upstate New York. And there were prize winning poets there. There were novelists whose books were, won these prizes. And there was me. And I, just felt totally inadequate. And there was a lot of drinking going on and, social drinking. Nobody was getting messed up. But everywhere I went, there was just bottles and bottles and bottles. And so here's the strange thing that happened, this mystical thing. Ooh. I decided, let me leave for an evening, and because I don't know what to do, because I don't want to drink, and there's so much going around, and everybody's kindly offering me drinks. And nearby there was a college that had a poetry reading series going on. There was a conference going on, so I went over there, and I'm listening to a couple of poets read, and I don't even know what they were saying. I wasn't paying attention, but I saw the back of a head of a woman with long blonde hair. And this looked like the back of the head of the woman from that Shakespeare conference that I attended, the one who told me about the meetings.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, it's got to be her, but why would she be here? She lives in a different state. So after the reading, she turns around, it's not her. But I figured, all right, I did something I never do. I went and talked to her anyway. I'm not that kind of a guy who talks to strange women. And I just said, hi, we started talking. And I said, this is the worst pickup line in the world. You remind me of somebody I know. And she doesn't run away. And I said she talked about she would go to AA meetings or something like that. I said this, and the woman says, "Oh, I know." I didn't say. I said she said she was a friend of Bill, and she said I'm a friend of Bill.
Wow.
And I said, "Wow." And I said she talked about meetings, and she said, "I'm going to a meeting when I leave here." And that was the ooh kind of thing. So I went to this meeting with her in the basement of a nearby church. And I was at that artist colony for another 2 or 3 weeks. And I went there pretty much every night for the next 2 or 3 weeks. And I was being taken care of. The universe was watching me. And
Yeah.
maybe all those prayers I said for 15 years were kicking in. And when I most needed it,
Right.
it was there.
Right. I think that's a I think one of the symptoms of my alcoholism is my impatience with things. And there's a lot of talk about the promises. And one of the other things that I was sometimes quickly and sometimes slowly, and I always think, like, why does it have to be so slow? And that's just me being stubborn and impatient. And so when I hear you talk about 15 years of doing these things to find this moment where you're like, aha, this thing happens. And
Mhm.
and I mean, that's awesome. And it's quite hopeful that perhaps the tiny little bit of work that I put in every morning or every week, there's some other thing that's waiting down the road. And just because I don't get it today, because my ego wants it, right? My self wants it so bad today, doesn't mean that it's not necessarily waiting for you, but it's being created in some way, in your own mind or in the world, or however we like to look at it, you know? But those aha moments, those God shots, as they call them sometimes. So this woman takes you to these meetings for the next 2 to 3 weeks.
Yep.
And how does it feel? What is it? I mean, is it?
I felt like I didn't want to belong there because that would be admitting.
Uh-huh.
And I wasn't quite ready yet.
Okay.
But several other things happened is that I started having drinking dreams, and they frightened me. And I started writing about them, which was the only thing I knew I could do. I started writing poems about them.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing is that I started getting, this is going to sound really even more. My mother, who had died when I was 7, started visiting. Not in a like ghost kind of way or ectoplasm, but I just felt her presence. And I felt both comforted and startled by it. So I started writing about her, and I'd never written about my alcohol. I'd never drunkenness. I'd never written about my mother, and I started to do that. And I continued doing it, and over the next few years, and it began to work it out. I began to figure things out, and accept. That was the big thing: is accept that who I am, and try to get rid of the shame, because so much of my life, early life, was involved in shame.
Yeah.
And that's a killer. And I think that's part of what my mother's problem had been, with shame, why she was so sad.
Yeah. That's fascinating. That it, the idea that here's this thing that makes sense, right? This group of people who come together, this program, and it makes a lot of sense, but we don't want to be a part of it because yeah. So for 15 years, you're sober, you're living life, you're doing things, everything seems relatively fine, right? But you're still living with the shame, and then also not having the language
Right.
to be
That's a big part of it.
and to realize that, oh, this is how I can define it, this is how I can describe it, and then being able to work it out. Because I think that too is something that's still in this age of information, right? And people are still, or they don't want to admit it. I mean, nobody does. I've yet to meet somebody in the throes of alcoholism who wants to admit it, because that would require change.
Yeah.
But finding the language is such an important thing, and being able to express it to ourselves, let alone anyone else. What about, and I just recently had a drinking dream. I haven't had them in years, and I don't know where it came from. I'm tracing back and going, like, what haven't I done? What part of my program have I not worked on? These kinds of things, whatever it was. But it still struck me, almost 7 years sober, haven't had a drinking dream in probably like 5 years. I woke up, I was flooded with the guilt and the shame. I felt that I had ruined something,
Yeah.
that things were over, that it didn't last too long, but for like a couple of hours that morning, like it took me to get that feeling out. And I was like, oh my God. And then I had spoken to somebody who was 19 years sober, and they said something about the 6 or 7, 8 year mark where it can be kind of blah, and people this, that, and the other. And I was like, well, maybe this is just a reminder of what's waiting. Like
Yeah.
you can always go back, and my friend in the dream poured me a big vodka on the rocks, because that was the last, the last drinks.
That's
Because
pretty
it was lots.
specific.
Yes, yes,
That's pretty
yes.
specific. That's
It was
dangerous.
it
Yeah.
was a vodka on the rocks.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
asked him for a double. He only gave me a single. I was very angry in that dream. But
I,
yeah. So I think that it was like just a nice little reminder of
yeah.
what is there for me. So so AA finally clicks for you. At what point do you say, this is for me, this is who I am,
It
after those
was,
few weeks?
yeah, it was after I got home and I started looking at the writing I had done, and I
Mhm.
realized, okay, my name is Peter and I'm an alcoholic. I never went back to AA after I left. I didn't feel the need to. I still had a sense of community. I was with Baha'is where I
Mhm.
live in South Jersey, and I had what I didn't have. I had my family. I had more of a security. And when I went back to the artist con, I was invited back 3 or 4 more times. I felt much more secure. I didn't feel inadequate. I didn't feel like they made a mistake by inviting me here. I felt more of that I belonged, which was important, I think, for me. I wanted to say something else. You made me think of this. When I stopped drinking, I also stopped feeling. I don't know if this is common or not, but
Mm.
because there was so much pain and so much sorrow in my early life, um, I didn't know this until later on, and after many years after I stopped drinking. But I also stopped feeling joy. I stopped feeling the ranges of emotion that I had felt earlier, and I realized I was keeping it under control. I just want to, stay in this narrow focus, because if you go too much one way, you can go too much the other way. And I wasn't doing it consciously, but it was only after a couple of moments where I realized, wait a minute, I should be feeling something more here, and refusing or being afraid to allow myself to feel that. And once I started to, this was after those times at the arts college, after I admitted this, I began to feel more comfortable allowing myself to feel stuff, both joy as well as sadness.
Yeah.
And these are big parts of life that I was deliberately, without knowing it, not letting myself feel.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I've had conversations about, you know what, man, I'm just going to be content. I don't want to feel crazy either way.
Yep.
And this feels to me like a step in the right direction,
Yeah,
right?
definitely.
And maybe it is, in that I don't want to feel the dark despair that I did,
Mhm.
from any number of um things that I dealt with in the past, of my own doing, and from growing up. But it does also close the door on getting inspired, getting excited,
Yep.
um and just and maybe, and I'm just thinking of this now, I hadn't thought of this before, but maybe in some way it is still living in fear, because I don't want to feel those things.
Mhm.
I
Yeah,
mean,
no, definitely the fear part.
um so when do you how did you get out of that uh focus of contentment to feel joy, and actually want to, or be able to feel sadness?
Once I started admitting it, when I started writing it, I started publishing, and I started talking about it. I think then I felt okay. Well, and I found out too that I wasn't the only person, who had gone through this, because it's it's a disease, and it's out there. Once I start, that's the other part, that this whole idea of it being a disease, that was a shock to me. I thought it was because I was degenerate. As I said, I had my degenerate periods. So it wasn't a matter of moral inferiority or something. It was something else. And then, genetics. Oh, that explains an awful lot. Both sides of my family going back generations. So, okay, that's like the high blood pressure and a heart attacks in my family. I get it. And so I think that's when I began to, I don't say relax, but began to allow myself to feel more, to take more risks emotionally. Part of it is service, is trying to help others. And I think a big way of helping others is by making yourself vulnerable, just even in talking to people. And by this point, I was also teaching. I taught English and creative writing in Atlantic City here for almost 30 years. And a lot of my students had lives far worse than I did. And when I opened myself up, they opened themselves up. And one young lady, this actually happened right after I came back from the artist colony, and my time at the meetings. She was one of my prize creative writing students, a terrific poet, and she didn't show up in September the way she should have been. And it was this great mystery of what happened. She wasn't there. She finally shows up in November or December, and she's a different person. She had been this sort of, my perception, this very prim, very upper middle class young lady. And now she's very, I don't say loose. I don't mean loose in a negative way, but she's very more relaxed with herself. And turns out that over the summer, she had been drunk under the boardwalk and had been gang raped, and was institutionalized. And then she was in a program, a residential program, where she became sober.
Yeah.
And so now she's back in school, and she's a pretty, I would say, beautiful young woman. She was maybe 17, and she would cut school in the middle of the day to go to meetings in Atlantic City with all of these, men, older men like that. And they were no match for her by this point. And so I would write her excuse notes or something like that, so she wouldn't get in trouble. And then she said to me one day, "Mr. Murphy, you know about the 13th step? You know about the 13th step?" And I didn't know what there's no. So she told me, "How frank can I be here? Can I?"
You can be as frank as you want. Please do.
So, all right. So anyway, so I said, "What's that?" And she said, "Well, she learned you don't come to these meetings to get laid, because you'll only get fucked." And coming from the mouth of this young one, I was like, "Wow, this kid has grown up a lot."
Yeah.
So she went on and had a short but productive life. She went to college, got a graduate degree. She worked in as a counselor. She ran an agency, for people in recovery, and then died of a heart attack in their 30s.
Wow.
Which is, just a tragic loss.
Wow.
Because she had been just so full of life, and to overcome so much. So, but I also connected with a lot of other students, many of whom were, as I said, going through worse problems than I did. And I think I was able to, I use poetry a lot of times just to help them, just have them learn to write, and maybe poetry would do for them what it had done for me. And some of them didn't want to write poetry, wanted to write stories and prose. I had to learn how to teach them that too. So that helped me grow.
Yeah. So obviously the writing was very important to you very early on. I would consider myself the same. I had huge periods of absolutely no productivity and trying to write while I was absolutely drunk. I still have those notebooks, and there's just like the handwriting gets worse and worse and worse. There's no legible sentences, and then there's a bunch of swear words across the page. Like, it's just terrible. And in sobriety, I guess there's three things that have really hit home for me as far as important is, I'll use the word transformative, which I'm always hesitant to use because it sounds kind of corny.
Yeah, but it's real. It's real.
But it's real. And it was getting sober. Running for me was something that really transformed my life. And then writing sober, because I always imagined myself, I played my Bukowski role very well. I lived it to the fullest. I had my little bungalow. I drank myself silly. I wrote terrible poems. I
Yep.
even had a cat. Like, I did it all. There's a tattoo on my chest, the bluebird in my heart, all that stuff, right? So I lived it, and it doesn't work. And I'm confident that I want to put all those poems in a collection and call it Bukowski Lied. But I don't
like
know
that. I like that.
yeah.
I like that.
But in sobriety, I took a course it was online this last summer out of Yale University from somebody. The instructor was somebody I know personally. I do now, and somebody I respect and whose writing I respect. And this was also something that was very transformative, because in sobriety too, I think we often feel like frauds. And in writing, that probably, I know a lot of writers who go like, yeah, I'm not really a writer, or, I can't really write, or nobody wants to read my stuff. Or, even I hear myself saying, well, you're just a middle-aged white guy who got sober through running and writing. Like, what a cliche. What story could you possibly tell to the world that would be of any interest? But the writing has been very transformative, if for nothing else than my daily life of being okay. Right. How did writing help you? And in those early times when you talked about writing about your alcoholism, writing about your mother, I imagine there's no sense of like, I'm going to publish this, or this will be something of my works. At least for me, it was like, I'm just going to get these things out on paper. How does that help someone? How does writing help someone get sober, stay sober, understand themselves sober? For you?
For me, when I first started writing poetry, I was, 15, and I was writing Woe Is Me, teenage poetry schlock. And I was interested in expressing myself. And frankly, nobody cares. I didn't even care. So after writing a few hundred very bad poems, and realizing girls like boys who are sensitive, and what better way than showing girl you're sensitive or showing a poem? That was a bonus. But I realized after I started reading poetry, which I hadn't done, it's much more than that. I discovered so much from reading poetry, not just about myself, but about the world, and about this connection we have to each other through language, through words. That's what I wanted to do. I didn't want to just repeat what had been written. I wanted to write something new. And I started writing to discover, writing to reveal to myself, writing to understand. And that was really the key. So when I was writing in sobriety, and admitting and writing about my mother, writing about drinking, it was trying to understand the process, trying to understand why I had gotten to that point. And one of the things about poetry I could do is I could disguise it. So I wrote through myth and fairy tale and comic books, comic stories. Do you know Casper the Friendly Ghost?
Oh yeah.
Who he was the character. Well, I always thought Casper was very strange because he was a little boy who died and came back, right?
Yeah.
But he was trying to make friends with the living, but why didn't he go back to the people who loved him? I always wondered about that. And when I was, after my mother died, and I was in this home, and some relatives were taking us in, I was afraid I was going to be like Casper, that I was going to I wouldn't be able to make friends with these people, with other people, and I'd have to wander the streets of Brooklyn, for the rest of my life, trying to make friends, because there was nobody I could go back to. I didn't have that people, but why didn't Casper go back? So I wrote a poem about Casper the Friendly Ghost, about myself as being Casper, like that. And that really helped me. Then I wrote another poem based on a Grimm fairy tale. And the fairy tale is the shortest of the Grimm fairy tales, called The Stubborn Child. It goes like this. Once upon a time, they all begin, right? There was a little boy who didn't do what his mother told him to do. And she told him he had to be good or God would strike him dead. Well, he was bad and God struck him dead. This is just a paragraph. And he was buried in the backyard. And he still was bad because he raised his hand above the earth. And so the mother went out with a stick and hit the hand. And usually the Grimm fairy tales end, and they lived happily ever after, right?
Hmm.
This one ends, and for the first time, he had peace beneath the earth. So I realized that was my childhood. So I wrote a poem called The Stubborn Child about my mother taking me into her grave, where I continued to fidget. And I was trying to be a good boy, even though I was dead, living in this grave with my mother. And it helped me understand that I was still so attached to her and her death. Because I wrote this poem when I was in my 30s.
Yeah.
And that finally she hit me so hard, it knocked me right out of the grave. She smacked me with her thin right arm so hard, I wound up being standing in the earth, shaking and not knowing how to walk, and having learned how to walk again.
Hmm.
And so that was my sort of metaphor for becoming sober and learning how to live. And the poem ends. It took me a long time to find the ending, where my own daughter, who at the time was about 7 years old, is lying in bed, having her own stubborn dreams, and I'm raising my hands above her, whispering, prayers. Because one of the things that happened when I became a father is I didn't want to I knew I was going to make mistakes, but I didn't want to make the same mistakes that my family had done. Let me make new mistakes. I didn't want to screw up my daughter in the same way I had been screwed up with. Let me screw up in other ways, which I've been successful with, but not in the ways I had been. And so that's what writing can do. It can help you understand. It can help you discover. It can help you reveal. It doesn't solve anything, but it just gives you a way to make your way in the world. That's what it's done for me. It gave me an identity too. All of a sudden, I became a poet, and that's not. What do you want to be when you grow up? Oh, executive. This. Nobody says they want to be a poet, but I became that, and it became something I made respectable. And
Yeah.
because I became a teacher for so many others, I was able to share this way of life of living in the world is important, making living is important, but also paying attention to the to language, paying attention to the soul, paying attention to this other kind of abstractions is also important in a way of dealing with it.
Yeah.
So that's what it had done for me in sobriety, and I think that's how it. I lead writing workshops now for adults, and one of the things I always say is change your life. Can I don't know if can I show you an image here on
Sure.
up there? Okay, let me put it on the what do you go to
Yeah.
screen share here. Okay, so it says I'm disabled for screen share. Okay, let me put it in if I can put it in the chat.
um how do I do this? So shoot, I don't know.
Okay, that's right. I'll put it in the chat.
Okay.
You can see it, but it's an image. I can even put it in the chat. I don't see the uplink here. Let me try it here. No, I can't do it there, but okay, I can. Hang on a minute.
Well,
All right, put in the chat so you can open up. It's a picture of an image. Once it comes up there, you'll see it.
okay.
It says "Change Your Life,"
Change
and
your
it's a
life.
large stone that change your life. It'll come up there in a moment. And it's an image from the Berlin Wall. It's one of the sections from the Berlin Wall that had been graffitied. And it's on display in London outside the Imperial War Museum. Well, when I saw this in London, that's what it became so important to me. That was an image that meant something, both because it's artistic, it's revolutionary because it's part of the Berlin Wall, and it has a message. It's a quote from a Goethe poem, says that you must change your life. And so I used this image in my workshops about writing and what writing can do for you, and how writing can change your life. I don't know if you've been able to see it there.
Yeah, I see it.
It's a gorgeous image, and it's surprising to me. It's at the Imperial War Museum, a museum dedicated to war, but it's actually not about war. It's about people.
Yeah.
And used the word transformation earlier, and it's about transformation.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's what writing does. That's what I try to get people to do is that, and I tell people to come to my workshops that if you come here, whether it's a day workshop or one that lasts for a week or two, whether it's in the United States or abroad, and you leave the same way you came, you wasted your time and your money. You come here to write, but don't leave writing the same way you wrote before.
Yeah.
And look at your life the way it can be. So I see writing as a transformative force. And one doesn't have to have an addiction problem. Everybody has problems. Everyone is making their way in the world, and writing is one way to navigate that world. And I guess any artistic value would be to make it a better world.
Yeah.
When I met the Baha'is, one of the things they said is that art raised to the level of worship, that art can be prayer. And nobody had ever considered my poetry prayer. And I think that was the other thing that attracted me to Baha'i, is that, when I was growing up, I couldn't tell anybody I was writing poetry. I'd get beat up, or I'd be called, all sorts of names, sissy and all this other stuff, and worse. But here was this religion from God that was saying this was kind of prayer. That got my attention.
Yeah, one of the things that changed my mind about prayer too was when you talk about it being poetry. I read a book. One of my favorite musicians, who's also sober, his name is Mike Doty. He was in a band called Soul Coughing. He was a New York guy for a very long time in the 90s. So he's a musician, but he was also very much a poet. He wrote a book about his experience called The Book of Drugs. And in there, he talks about his difficulty with prayer. Like, it didn't make sense. Who am I praying to? I'm sitting on a park bench and just like letting it go off into the sky to somebody. So all these things that it's very difficult surprisingly difficult for those of us who purport to have large imaginations, but we can't seem to grasp an idea of God. But he said in the book, he started writing down the prayers, and that made more sense to him. And so I just took that. And so now that's how I start the morning in the journal, is like, what do I want for my prayer today? And if it's just something general, or, and I've also been told that praying for other people works a lot better than praying for yourself. So I try to keep it out as much as possible. But it's made more sense and made it easier for there to be a practice of prayer in my life, just to write it down every day.
That's interesting. Yeah.
I don't know if it works, but
it's working. It's working. When I was young, I saw prayer as a way of trying to get what I wanted. And that didn't work. And now I see prayer. When I pray, I don't pray for stuff. I pray to understand and accept God's will. And that works for me. Sometimes I have an intent, specific things. Somebody may be ill, so maybe going through something, but it's that we're able to accept it. We're able to recognize what's happening and see it as kind of, I don't want to say good thing, but see it as maybe having some kind of a purpose that we don't understand, and maybe trying to understand that a little bit better.
Right.
And it's hard. But that's I rely on it.
And purpose is important, right? And because part of my I don't know, I'm still developing my whole ideology of the world and the universe and all of that stuff, but right?
Hopefully you won't stop.
That's a very good point. But the thing that I've come to understand as best that I can is that it's quite possible that all of this is absolutely meaningless, the world and everything, right? But that doesn't mean that I can't have some small purpose or meaning in the things that I do and the things that I say and the people that I talk to and the relationships that I have, that those can have some meaning. But do I think there's some larger meaning? I can't get my head around it yet, but no, I think that it's probably all just an absolute accident that we're all here, and what an amazing one it is, right? What an absolute amazing one. So I think the importance of purpose, finding purpose, especially for somebody who's trying to get sober, because like you said, in those very first moments, you're like, damn it, I wanted to die and I couldn't even do that right.
Yeah.
And then to try and come to have a life of purpose is, I mean, it's a huge feat and it takes a long time, but um, I just think it has become really important for me to not be as nihilistic as I love to be, still as cynical as I love
Yeah,
to be.
I love cynicism. Yeah. I'd like to just revise what you're saying for myself a tiny bit,
Yes.
and that is a life of service. Um, and in the Bahai Faith, it says the highest station we can be at is service. I
Yes.
didn't understand that, but when I first started attending Bahai meetings, when I got back to New York, I just felt inadequate. Why am I even here? Until I started setting up chairs,
Mm-hmm.
putting down the chairs at the end. I had something to do.
Mm-hmm.
And okay, anybody need an errand? And just trying to, help people, do stuff, stupid stuff. But it
Yeah.
gave me that sense of what you're saying, purpose, and eventually began to believe in myself as I escalated my service more and higher, that whatever we do can be valuable, even the little stuff.
Mm-hmm.
We need somebody to put the chairs up and take them down. We need somebody to do that. We need somebody to plan a whole year's budget. We need both of those things. We need somebody to design buildings. We need somebody to do this, build bridges, to teach children. But I started off putting chairs up and taking them down. And that's, if I hadn't done that, I may not have gotten to the next step. And that idea of serving others as a way of approaching God, that was one of the important things for me. And it also gave me the reason why I don't need to drink, because I have a purpose. I'm setting up chairs. I'm taking them
Yeah.
down. I'm driving somebody to a meeting. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I'm asked to visit somebody who's ill. Okay, I don't want to do that because I get really nervous around that. But okay, I'll do that because that person needs somebody to visit them, and I can do it.
Yeah.
Terrifying stuff,
Yeah.
but somebody has to do it, and I grow by doing it.
Yeah. And it's another thing that I've come to realize is that a lot of the problems that I had with alcoholism, with alcohol, a lot of them being selfish in specific and being self-centered and being narcissistic, these were still very much human issues, human problems, let alone alcohol problems. These are things that people, you
Yeah,
don't need
yeah,
alcohol to be selfish, self-centered, and narcissistic. And it's easy to get down on myself and my problems in my own head. It's awful in there some days, you know what I mean? And the best way to get out of there is to go help somebody else with their problems,
yep,
right? Even if it is just chairs.
yep. You mentioned a word earlier that I want to comment on. That was the
Mm-hmm.
word ego. You have trouble with ego. And in the Baha'i Faith, we don't have a sense of heaven or hell or devils or anything like that. But the closest we have to a Satan is called the evil whisperer, and that's
Mm,
ego. That thing that's
yeah.
always telling us, whispering in our ears that we deserve more. The world, needs to treat us better. We are better than others, and that's can be. I mean, we need ego to live in the world, but it's that overabundance of ego. I think if we look at history, I see somebody like Hitler, which is a very dramatic example of ego. He wanted more, he deserved
Mm-hmm.
more, and look at the damage he did.
Mm-hmm.
And look at all of that. We can look at contemporary leaders around the world, and
Sure.
we still have that problem. It is an abundance of ego, too much ego. That's I think where evil comes from. Um,
Yeah.
we don't need to go to fires and brimstone. We have it here on terra firma.
That's very true as well. And it reminds me, there was a guy, my dad had a friend, and his name was Johnny Apfel. And I don't know I can't remember anything else about him, but it was something you just said. And he would say something, he always said, there is no heaven and hell. Heaven and hell is right here on earth.
Mhm.
And it just reminded me, I don't know, out of the blue, but also the idea of how much we do have, and that we don't, more is, and it's fine to be ambitious and to want more and to
Right.
create more and all that stuff, right? But like, I was on a bike ride yesterday and I was just cruising through and I was like, this is great, this is like, it's beautiful, it was cool, it was sunny, I'm in California, like, it's just, man, I have everything I want in this moment.
Mhm.
And it was absolutely perfect. And it was, And again, I had to go and I there's a stack of, it says taxes, bank, and bills on the whiteboard behind me, and I've got to go do all those things. And that's been up
Oh, yeah.
there for the last 4 days. But yeah, so it is definitely something to remind ourselves of, that we don't have to have everything all the time. And in fact, we have a lot more than we like to imagine sometimes. Then we let our ego get in the way and tell us that we don't.
Very good. And I think the other thing is gratitude. That's another important part of just being grateful and letting
Mhm.
people know and be grateful for them, grateful to them.
Yeah, it's and I think it's hard to, everything's hard in early sobriety. But when you're like, just do a gratitude list, and they're like, oh, I gotta write 5 more things that I'm grateful for.
Yep. Mhm.
But that list gets easier and easier, and the things get better and better. And sometimes it's like, I'm sober, there's clean water, I got to sleep in a bed, whatever it is. And those things, right? I mean, after time. Can you talk a little bit about the writing workshop that you do? I love these things. I want to go to more. I'm quite curious about the 2-week writing workshop in Atlantic City at this point.
Yeah.
What does that involve?
Well, we do a number of different length programs. Before the pandemic, we were supposed to go to Florida that week, literally. So that got postponed. We're going to Florida in 2 weeks to lead a week-long writing workshop. I'll be doing one in memoir, and one of my colleagues will be doing a poetry one.
Mhm.
Every summer, we've been going to a city in Europe, either to Wales, Scotland, or Spain, and doing a week-long one. And we usually do one in New Hampshire every August. And that one, we just found out we were planning to go there, but the venue did not survive COVID. So unfortunately, we're not going there. So we're doing a shortened version in Atlantic City. It's not going to be 2 weeks, this one. It's going to be just for 4 days. The university I'm associated with, Stockton University, has built a campus right on the boardwalk in Atlantic City. So we're going to be putting people up on the boardwalk.
Huh.
And we're going to have, I'll be leading writing workshops during the day, and we'll have free time for people to go to the beach, explore the city. And at nighttime, we have several activities. We're going to have a story slam one night, professional DJ. We'll also have, we're working on getting tickets for some of the shows at some of the casinos, headliners, and stuff like that. We just found out the band Fish is going to be in town playing on the beach for 3 nights. I'm not a Fish fan. I don't
Me
even
neither,
understand what
but
it is, but
sure.
people get excited about it, and thousands of people go. So that'll be happening at the same time. And so if anybody's interested, if I can give a website, that's murphywriting.com. We don't have that up yet, but we have other programs, murphywriting.com. And I started leading workshops back in the late 80s, early 90s. And people would say, how do you find time to write? And at the time, when I wasn't going to an artist colony in the summer, I would spend time going to renting a hotel room a weekend a month. And when I told people, I go, I rent the hotel room. That's why I find time to write. And people said, I wish I could go with you. So in 1993, I stupidly booked a block of rooms at a hotel, invited people to come with me. And that grew into Murphy Writing Seminars, which is now Murphy Writing of Stockton University. And so it's a thing now. I mean, I never saw myself getting into the writing business, but the university made an offer I couldn't resist about 7 or 8 years ago, and hired myself and my staff to run it. And we have a beautiful office in what's called the Noise Museum Arts Garage. It's a parking garage, but the whole first floor is art studios, galleries, and us, Murphy Writing. So that's where we're based. So we do programs online. We have some online writing workshops as well. We do tutoring online. We do professional development in schools all over the country. So we do have a whole range of stuff. We just had 2 Zooms right before I got on here. One with a school in North Jersey for to work with their teachers for a 40-day program. And then we also spoke with the school in New York City this morning about bringing a group of high school students down to the Stockton campus for a couple of days to do writing and to do nature. So these are things that we also do, and it's a kind of service also.
Yeah.
And the people I work with, my colleagues, that they believe, as I do, of writing to be a transformative thing to do, give meaning to life. So it's it's a wonderful thing.
Yeah, I think I'm going to stop judging myself for using the word transformative. I think
It's important.
I
Change
think
your
I'm
life.
over it.
That'll be the
Yes,
first thing you can do in changing is
change your life.
change life. And that's what your life is. Everything you've described, it is.
Yeah,
And that's our purpose, is to grow and evolve.
yeah, yeah. 4 days in Atlantic City in August, you said?
In August, yeah. August,
Huh.
the first week of August, and it's dirt cheap. We're trying to keep it under $500 for everything, including room, board, workshops, and everything else. So we should have that up on our website, murphyredding.com, within the next few weeks. But you can go to our email and get on the email list, and you'll be informed of that.
Okay.
So that'll be just one thing. So you can come up to Atlantic City, and we get to meet in person.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, Peter, thank you so much. This was really great. I really enjoyed this, and I am looking forward to digging around on some of your writings and the workshop and the website. Yeah, and thank you for sharing.
Well, thank you, John. And good to get to meet you and hear part of your story. And
Yeah,
as I said, it's important. So thank you for doing it.
thank you.
Thanks again for listening. Our music, as always, is by Neglect. You can find more of his stuff at neglect.bandcamp.com.
And you can find us on all social media platforms that matter: Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And you can reach us at aisforalcoholic@gmail.com.
Talk to you later.
Yeah.